Mojisola Akande stood barefoot in the middle of a dusty village square, her face streaked with tears as laughter and whispers circled around her. A woman pushed past her, spilling dirty water across her feet. No one defended her, not even the man she loved. Obinna Eze stood a few steps away, silent, distant, his eyes unreadable, before turning his back and walking away, as if she meant nothing. The crowd watched her break, but she didn't scream. She only whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Was my love just a test? If you're watching this, where are you from? And what time is it there? And if stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next." In the restless heart of Lagos, where the noise of traffic never truly slept, and survival often depended on how early one woke up, Mojisola Akande had already been on her feet long before sunrise. The air was still cool when she stepped out of her small, rented room in Mushin, balancing a metal tray of freshly cooked akara on her head. Her wrapper was neatly tied despite its fading colors, and her slippers had long lost their original shape. Still, she walked with quiet dignity. Mojisola did not have much, but she had something that many around her had lost: gentleness. Every morning she stood near a busy junction selling akara and pap to workers rushing to catch buses. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, even those who ignored her. Some days she sold everything. Other days she returned home with leftovers and a heart heavy with worry about rent, food, and the uncertain tomorrow. But no matter how little she earned, she never turned away someone who was truly hungry. That was how Obinna Eze first noticed her. He had not intended to stop that morning. His car, a sleek dark SUV, had slowed only because of a brief congestion ahead. Sitting in the back seat, dressed in a simple shirt and trousers that hid his true status, Obinna watched the world outside his tinted window with the calm eyes of a man who had seen too much. Then he saw her. A small boy no older than 6 stood near Mojisola's stall, staring at the food with hollow eyes. His clothes were torn, his feet bare and dusty. He did not beg. He only watched. Most people passed him without a second glance, but Mojisola noticed. Without hesitation, she picked up 2 pieces of akara, wrapped them carefully in old newspaper, and handed them to the boy. "Eat slowly," she said softly, as if speaking to someone precious. When he reached out nervously, she added a small cup of pap and gently guided him to sit on a nearby wooden bench. The boy ate like someone who hadn't tasted kindness in days. Obinna leaned forward slightly in his seat. He had seen charity before. He had funded entire foundations, built schools, donated millions. But what he saw in that moment was different. There was no camera, no audience, no expectation of return. Just a quiet act of humanity done without hesitation. "Sir," his driver asked, noticing his silence. Obinna did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on Mojisola. "Stop here," he said finally. The driver hesitated, but obeyed. Obinna stepped out of the car, blending into the morning crowd with surprising ease. He walked toward the stall. His posture relaxed, his presence unassuming. To anyone watching, he was just another man navigating Lagos. Mojisola looked up as he approached. "Good morning." She greeted, her voice warm, despite the long day ahead of her. "Good morning," he replied. "What would you like, akara?" he said simply. She nodded and began serving him, her movements quick and practiced. As she handed him the food, their fingers brushed briefly. It was a small moment, but something about it lingered. Obinna studied her face, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with quiet curiosity. "You gave him your food," he said, nodding towards the boy. Mojisola glanced over, then smiled faintly. He needed it more. "And if you don't sell everything?" She shrugged lightly. "God provides. Sometimes through people, sometimes through patience." Obinna raised an eyebrow, and today she looked at him directly for the first time. "Maybe through you." There was no sarcasm in her voice, only sincerity. He almost smiled. He paid for the food more than necessary, but she immediately tried to return the extra. "You gave too much," she said. "It's fine." "No," she insisted gently. "Take your change." Obina paused. It had been a long time since anyone insisted on fairness with him. He took the change. From that day he returned. Not every day, not predictably, but often enough. Sometimes he came in the morning, sometimes in the late afternoon when the sun cast long shadows over the street. Each time Mojisola greeted him the same way with kindness that did not change based on what she thought he had. They began to talk. At first it was simple things, weather business, the chaos of Lagos, but slowly their conversations deepened. Mojisola spoke about her life without self-pity. She told him about losing her mother years ago, about raising herself through small jobs, about learning that kindness was not weakness, but strength. "People think if you have nothing, you should hold on to everything," she said one evening as she packed up her stall. "But I've learned sometimes the little you give is the only thing that makes you feel human." Obina listened. He did not interrupt. He did not correct. He simply absorbed every word. There was something about her that unsettled him, not in discomfort, but in truth. She saw the world differently, not through wealth or status, but through people. And that was rare, very rare. What Mojisola did not know was that Obinna Eze was not just an ordinary man. He was a billionaire. A man whose name carried weight in boardrooms across Africa and beyond. A man who had built an empire from nothing, who had learned early that people often loved comfort more than character. Over the years, he had seen relationships fail, not because of hardship, but because of hidden expectations. He had watched people change when they discovered who he truly was, and so he stopped revealing it. Instead, he observed, carefully, quietly, and now he was observing her. One evening, as the sky turned orange and the city began to slow, Obina stood beside her longer than usual. "Mojisola," he said. She looked up. "Do you ever think about leaving Lagos?" She laughed softly. "Every day. Why don't you?" She tied her wrapper tighter, thinking, "Because running away doesn't change who you are. And this city? It tests you. If you survive here, you can survive anywhere." He nodded slowly. "What if I asked you to come somewhere with me?" he said. She froze slightly. "Where my village?" She frowned. "Your village, yes." Why Obina hesitated. Not because he lacked an answer, but because the truth was too complex to explain in one sentence. "Because I want you to see where I come from," he said finally. "And I want to see how you see it." Mojisola studied his face. There was something in his tone she could not fully understand. "Is it far?" she asked. "Yes." "Is it difficult there?" He met her gaze. "Yes." She looked away for a moment, her mind racing. This was not just an invitation. It felt like something else, something deeper, something she couldn't yet name. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Obina did not answer immediately. Because the truth was this, he was not just inviting her to a village. He was inviting her into a test of patience, of kindness, of love. A test that would reveal not just who she was, but whether she could remain that person when everything around her turned against her. "You'll understand when we get there," he said. Mojisola felt a strange unease settle in her chest. But beneath it, there was trust, and something else. Hope. "Okay?" she said softly. Obina nodded, but as he walked away that evening, his expression hardened slightly. Because deep down he knew something she didn't, where they were going would change everything. The days that followed Obina's invitation did not feel ordinary to Mojisola anymore. Lagos remained the same noisy, impatient alive, but something inside her had shifted. Every face she served, every coin she counted, every step she took, now carried a quiet question beneath it. What exactly was she walking into, Obina, on the other hand, did not rush her. He continued to visit her stall, as he always had, calm, composed, observant. If anything, he spoke even less than before. But his silence was not empty. It was filled with attention, with calculation, with something Mojisola could not quite read. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fading gold, Mojisola was packing up her things when her friend Bisi Ogunleya appeared beside her. Bisi was everything Mojisola was not: bold, outspoken, and fiercely protective. "I've been watching that man," Bisi said without greeting. Mojisola sighed softly. "Good evening to you too. I'm serious." Bisi insisted, folding her arms. "He comes, he goes, he asks questions like someone writing a report. And now you're telling me he wants to take you to his village." Mojisola kept arranging her tray. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Mojisola paused. That was the problem. She didn't know. "He's different," she said finally. Bisi scoffed. "Different? How quiet men are the most dangerous. They carry things you don't see." Mojisola smiled faintly. "Not everything hidden is dangerous. And not everything kind is safe," Bisi shot back. The two women stood in silence for a moment, the noise of Lagos filling the space between them. "Are you going?" Bisi asked. Mojisola nodded slowly. Bisi exhaled sharply. "Then at least ask yourself one question." Mojisola looked at her. "Why would a man with nothing test you for anything?" The question lingered long after Bisi walked away. That night sleep did not come easily. Mojisola lay on her thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling above her. The fan above barely worked, and the heat pressed against her skin, but it wasn't discomfort that kept her awake. It was uncertainty. She thought about Obina, his calm eyes, his measured words, the way he seemed to notice things others ignored. She thought about the way he had watched her give food to that boy, the way he had taken back his change when she insisted, the way he had said, "You'll understand when we get there." Something about that sentence unsettled her. It didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a doorway. And once she stepped through it, there might be no going back. Still, when morning came, Mojisola woke up as she always did. She tied her wrapper. She lifted her tray. She stepped into the world. Because no matter what was coming, life did not pause. Over the next few days, Obina began to show small glimpses of something deeper, not through words, but through moments. One afternoon, a man approached Mojisola's stall, visibly agitated. "You gave my son food yesterday," he said sharply. Mojisola nodded cautiously. "Yes." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Because he was hungry." The man shook his head. "You think hunger ends because of one meal you think you're helping." Mojisola didn't respond immediately. Obina stood a few steps away, watching. "I don't know if it ends," she said gently, "but I know for that moment." He didn't feel alone. The man stared at her, something unreadable in his eyes, before turning and walking away. Obina stepped forward. "You didn't defend yourself," he said. "There was nothing to defend. He was accusing you." Mojisola shrugged lightly. "Sometimes people are not angry at you. They're angry at their situation." Obina studied her. "And you carry that for them, no?" she said. "I just don't add to it." That answer stayed with him longer than he expected. Another day, heavy rain fell suddenly over the city. Traders rushed to cover their goods, people ran for shelter, and chaos spread through the street. Mojisola quickly gathered her things, but then she noticed an elderly woman struggling to move her basket of tomatoes out of the rain. Without hesitation, Mojisola dropped her own things and rushed to help. By the time she returned, her akara had been soaked, ruined beyond selling. Obina watched the entire scene. "You lost everything," he said. Mojisola looked at her ruined food and smiled faintly. "Not everything. What did you gain?" She thought for a moment. "Peace," she said. Obina didn't respond. because for the first time in a long time he didn't have a counter-question. Days turned into a quiet rhythm between them. They walked sometimes short distances, simple paths through crowded streets. They talked about small things, but beneath those conversations something deeper was forming. Not just affection, not just curiosity, but trust. One evening, as they sat on a low wooden bench by the roadside, watching people pass by, Obina spoke again. "We leave in 3 days," he said. Mojisola's heart tightened slightly. "So soon, yes." She nodded slowly. "Will it be safe?" she asked. Obina didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the moving crowd. "Safe," he repeated softly. "That depends on what you believe safety means." Mojisola frowned slightly. "I don't understand." "You will," he said. There it was again. That same answer, that same feeling. Mojisola turned to him. "Why won't you just tell me?" she asked, her voice carrying a trace of frustration for the first time. Obina met her gaze. Because if he told her, the test would lose its meaning. Because if she knew what was coming, her choices might change. Because he needed to see her not the version shaped by expectation, but the version shaped by truth. "I want to see you, as you are," he said. Mojisola's expression softened slightly. "And you think I'm hiding something?" "No," he said quietly. "I think the world changes people, and I want to know what it would take to change you." Silence settled between them. It was not comfortable, but it was honest. Mojisola looked down at her hands. "I don't know what you're expecting to find," she said, "but I'm not perfect. I'm not looking for perfection." "Then what are you looking for?" Obina didn't answer, because the truth was simple. He was looking for someone who would remain kind, even when kindness cost everything. Mojisola exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. Obina looked at her. "Okay, I'll come," she repeated. "Whatever this is, I'll come." There was no fear in her voice now, only quiet resolve. Obina nodded, but as he turned his gaze away, something flickered across his face, something almost like doubt. Because for all his confidence, for all his planning, there was one thing he could not control: what the test would do to her, and whether in the end he would still deserve the answer he was seeking. That night, Mojisola returned home and began preparing. She didn't have much to pack, just a small bag with a few clothes, a wrapper, and her savings carefully tied in a cloth. She paused for a moment, looking around her small room. This place had held her struggles, her tears, her quiet victories. And now she was leaving it behind, if only for a while. But something in her heart told her she would not return the same. As she lay down to sleep, the sounds of Lagos humming in the distance, one thought echoed in her mind. What if Bisi was right? But another voice answered softly. What if this is where your life changes? Far away in a quiet, guarded estate, far beyond the reach of Lagos noise, Obina stood by a large window, looking out into the night. Behind him, a man in a suit, his trusted aide, Chinedu Okafor, waited. "Everything is ready," Chinedu said. Obina nodded slowly. "And the village?" he asked. "Prepared," Chinedu replied, "just as you instructed." Obina closed his eyes briefly. "Good." Chinedu hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" he asked carefully. Obina opened his eyes again. "No," he said. And that was the truth, because no matter how carefully he had designed it, no matter how controlled the environment was, there was one thing he could not predict: the human heart. And in a few days, that was exactly what would be tested. The morning of departure arrived quietly, without ceremony. Lagos woke as it always did. Horns, blaring voices, rising engines, coughing into motion, but for Mojisola, everything felt strangely distant, as if she were standing just outside the rhythm of the city that had shaped her. She stood in front of her small room, her single bag resting at her feet. It wasn't much, just a few neatly folded clothes, her wrapper, and the small bundle of savings she had tied in cloth. She looked around the space one last time. The cracked wall, the old fan that barely worked, the thin mattress that had held both her exhaustion and her dreams. This place had seen her survive. Now she was stepping into something unknown. "Are you really doing this?" Bisi's voice cut through her thoughts. Mojisola turned. Bisi Ogunleye stood with her hands on her hips, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "You still have time to change your mind," Bisi added, stepping closer. Mojisola shook her head gently. "I already decided." Bisi frowned. "You don't even know where you're going properly. I know enough." "No, you don't," Bisi insisted. "You know a man who shows up, asks strange questions, and now wants to take you somewhere far from everything you know. That's not enough." Mojisola smiled faintly, though her eyes held quiet tension. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But sometimes, you don't need to know everything to take a step." Bisi stared at her, searching her face. "And if that step leads you somewhere you can't come back from?" Mojisola paused. The question settled deep, but instead of fear, something steadier rose in her chest. "Then I'll face it when I get there," she said softly. Bisi exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "You're too trusting, and you're too afraid," Mojisola replied gently. For a moment they simply looked at each other, two women shaped by the same city but carrying different defenses. Finally, Bisi stepped forward and pulled her into a tight embrace. "Just be careful," she whispered. Mojisola nodded. "I will." But as they separated, both of them knew something unspoken. Carefulness did not always protect you from what was coming. Obina arrived without announcement. No convoy, no display. Just the same quiet presence he had always carried. He stood a short distance away, observing Mojisola as she lifted her bag. "Ready?" he asked. Mojisola nodded. Yes. There was no dramatic farewell. No long goodbye, just a step forward. And then another. They left Lagos behind. The journey began on a paved road, the city slowly dissolving into quieter outskirts. Buildings gave way to open land. Traffic faded into occasional vehicles. The air changed less heavy, less crowded. Mojisola sat beside Obina in the car, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She watched the scenery shift through the window, her thoughts moving just as restlessly. "You've been quiet," Obina said after a while. "I'm thinking," she replied. "About what?" She hesitated. "About whether I should have asked more questions." Obina almost smiled. "And what would you ask now?" Mojisola turned to him. "Why me?" There it was again. The question he had avoided. This time he didn't look away. "Because you don't pretend," he said. Mojisola frowned slightly. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he replied. How Obina leaned back slightly. "Because people reveal themselves in small moments," he said, "when no one is watching, when nothing is expected." Mojisola thought about that. "And what did I reveal?" she asked quietly. "That you choose others. Even when it costs you," he said. She looked down at her hands. "That doesn't make me special." "No," Obina agreed. "It makes you rare." Silence returned, but it was different now. Heavier, more aware. Hours passed. The road became rougher. Paved paths turned into uneven terrain. Dust rose behind the car, coating the air in a thin, dry haze. Mojisola shifted slightly in her seat. "Is it much further?" she asked. "Not far," Obina replied. But something in his tone made her uneasy. The further they traveled, the more isolated everything felt. Houses became scarce. The land stretched wide and quiet, broken only by occasional clusters of huts in the distance. When the car finally slowed, Mojisola leaned forward slightly. "This is it?" she asked. Obina nodded. "Yes." The car came to a stop. Mojisola stepped out slowly. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not complete silence, but a different kind. No engines, no constant movement. Just the distant sounds of life carried on the wind voices, footsteps a child crying somewhere far off. The second thing she noticed was the condition. The village was worn. Houses made of mud and rusted metal sheets, paths uneven and dusty, no visible electricity lines, water containers lined outside homes, some empty. Children moved barefoot, their clothes faded and thin. Mojisola's chest tightened. This wasn't just poor, this was struggling. She turned to Obina. "This is where you grew up?" she asked softly. Obina looked at the village, his expression unreadable. "Yes." Before she could say anything else, a group of villagers began to gather. Their eyes were not welcoming. They were cautious, measuring. A woman whispered something to another. A man stood with folded arms, watching closely. Mojisola felt it immediately. She was not just a visitor. She was being judged. A tall man stepped forward from the group. His presence commanded attention. Chief Sani Dantala. His face was lined with age and authority, his gaze sharp and unyielding. He looked first at Obina, then at Mojisola. "And who is this?" he asked. His tone was not curious, it was challenging. Mojisola opened her mouth to respond, but Obina spoke first. "She is with me." Chief Sani's eyes narrowed slightly. "With you," he repeated. His gaze returned to Mojisola, slower this time, more deliberate. "What brings someone like you here?" he asked. Mojisola felt the weight of the question. She could feel the eyes of the entire village on her, but she did not lower her gaze. "I came because I was invited," she said calmly. A faint murmur moved through the crowd. Chief Sani tilted his head slightly. "Invited," he repeated. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth lifted not in kindness but in something closer to skepticism. "Let us see. How long you stay?" he said. The words settled heavily in the air. Mojisola felt a chill run through her despite the heat. She glanced at Obina. He said nothing. Did nothing. Just watched. And in that moment something shifted inside her, because for the first time since she had met him, she felt alone. As the villagers slowly dispersed, Mojisola stood still, taking everything in, the broken structures, the tired faces, the quiet hardship that hung in the air like dust. This was not Lagos. There were no quick escapes here, no distractions, no hiding. Everything was real. She turned to Obina again. "You didn't tell me it was like this," she said quietly. Obina looked at her. "I told you it would be difficult." Mojisola exhaled slowly. "This is more than difficult." He didn't argue, because he knew she was right, but he also knew something she didn't. This was only the beginning. Mojisola adjusted the strap of her bag. Her instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself. But another part of her, the part that had always guided her, whispered something different. Stay. And so she did. Not because it was easy, but because something inside her refused to turn away. Even now, even here, even when the first step into this place already felt like a test she didn't understand. And somewhere behind the stillness of his calm expression, Obina was watching, carefully, waiting. Because what came next would reveal everything. The first night in the village did not welcome Mojisola with rest. It welcomed her with reality. The small hut Obina led her to stood at the edge of the village, slightly apart from the others. Its walls were made of cracked mud patched unevenly with straw. The roof sagged in places, and a single wooden door hung loosely on worn hinges. Inside there was almost nothing. A thin mat, a clay pot, a broken stool leaning against the wall. Mojisola stood at the doorway for a long moment, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her bag. "This is where we'll stay?" she asked quietly. Obina nodded. "Yes. No apology, no explanation. Just a simple answer." Mojisola stepped inside slowly. The air was dry, carrying the faint smell of earth and smoke. She placed her bag down carefully, as if afraid even that small movement might disturb something fragile in the space. Back in Lagos, her room had been small, worn and imperfect, but it had been hers. It had held familiarity. This place held none. She turned to Obina. "There's no light," she said. "There's a lantern," he replied, pointing to a small object in the corner. Mojisola walked over, lifting it gently. It was old, but functional. "And water?" she asked. "There's a well," he said. "A short walk from here." She nodded slowly. Each answer revealed another layer of the life she had stepped into. And with each layer, the distance between her world and his seemed to grow. Night fell quickly. Without electricity, darkness settled over the village like a heavy blanket. The sky stretched wide above them, filled with stars Mojisola had never truly noticed in Lagos. She sat outside the hut for a while, watching the quiet movement of villagers finishing their day. Children huddled close to small fires. Women carried containers of water on their heads. Men spoke in low voices, their silhouettes blending into the dim light. It was a different rhythm, slower, harsher, unforgiving. Obina sat beside her, silent. "You grew up like this?" she asked after a while. "Yes." "And you left, yes?" She turned to him. "Why did you come back?" Obina didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. "I never really left," he said finally. Mojisola frowned slightly, sensing the weight behind his words, but not fully understanding them. Before she could ask more, a voice called out from the darkness. "Obina." A young boy ran toward them, his steps quick but uneven. His clothes were thin, his face marked by both energy and exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, looking at Obina with a mixture of excitement and hesitation. "You're back," the boy said. Obina nodded. "Yes, Musa?" The boy's eyes shifted to Mojisola. "Who is she?" he asked bluntly. Mojisola smiled gently. "My name is Mojisola," she said. "What's yours?" "Musa," he repeated. He studied her for a moment longer, then pointed at her bag. "You brought food?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried something deeper. Need. Mojisola hesitated only briefly before opening her bag. She pulled out a small portion of food she had packed for the journey. "It's not much," she said, handing it to him. Musa took it quickly, his eyes lighting up. "Thank you," he said, already turning to run back into the darkness. Mojisola watched him go, her chest tightening. "That's not enough," she murmured. "It never is," Obina replied. She looked at him. "And you're okay with that?" His gaze remained forward. "Are you?" The question settled heavily between them. Mojisola didn't respond, because she didn't know. The next morning came early. There were no alarms, no city noise to signal the start of the day, just the rising sun and the quiet movement of the village waking up. Mojisola stepped outside, stretching slightly as she took in the scene. And immediately she noticed something. People were watching her. Not openly, not aggressively, but enough. Whispers moved quietly from one person to another. She could feel it. Judgment, curiosity, doubt. She walked toward the well, carrying an empty container she had found in the hut. As she approached, a group of women stood nearby, drawing water and talking among themselves. Their voices lowered as she came closer. Mojisola greeted them softly. "Good morning." No one responded at first. Then one woman nodded slightly, without warmth. Mojisola stepped forward and began lowering the container into the well. Her movements were unfamiliar, slightly awkward. She had never done this before. The rope slipped slightly in her hands. One of the women clicked her tongue. "City girl," she muttered under her breath. Mojisola heard it, but she didn't react. Instead, she adjusted her grip and tried again. This time she managed to pull the container up, though her arms strained under the effort. Water spilled slightly as she lifted it. Another woman shook her head. "She won't last," she said quietly. Mojisola lifted the container onto her head, steadying it carefully. Her balance wavered for a moment, but she held it. Then she turned and walked back toward the hut. Step by step, without looking back. Later that day, Mojisola walked through the village, observing more closely. Children sat under a tree, some coughing lightly. An elderly man lay outside his home, his breathing uneven. A woman tried to cook over a weak fire, her face drawn with fatigue. This was not just poverty. This was neglect. Mojisola felt something rise inside her. Not pity, responsibility. She returned to the hut and began unpacking her small bag. There wasn't much, but she used what she had. She gathered some herbs she recognized nearby. She boiled water. She moved through the village quietly, offering small help where she could. Cleaning a wound, sharing water, sitting beside a sick child. At first, people resisted. Some turned away. Some refused her help. But she didn't force anything. She simply stayed. Patient, consistent, present. From a distance, Obinna watched. He did not interfere, did not guide, did not assist. He simply observed every choice, every reaction, every moment. Because this was where the test truly began. By evening, exhaustion weighed heavily on Mojisola's body. Her hands were sore, her feet ached. Her mind struggled to process everything she had seen. She sat outside the hut again, her shoulders slightly slumped. Obina approached. "You don't have to do all of this," he said. Mojisola looked up at him. "Who else will she ask? They've survived without you." She nodded. "Survived," she repeated. "Not lived." Obina studied her. "And you think you can change that?" "No," she said honestly. "But I can make it a little better, even if it's just for one person." Silence followed. Then Obina spoke again. "You're giving too much." Mojisola shook her head. "I'm giving what I can. And when it runs out..." She held his gaze. "Then I'll find another way." Obina looked away slightly, because that answer, it was exactly what he had expected. And yet, it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. As night fell again, the village settled into quiet. But beneath that quiet, something had begun to shift. A few villagers who had ignored her before now watched with less suspicion. A child she had helped smiled when she passed. Even the women at the well spoke slightly louder, their whispers less sharp. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was something. Mojisola lay down on the thin mat inside the hut, her body heavy with fatigue. As she closed her eyes, one thought lingered. Maybe I can make a difference here. Outside under the vast night sky, Obina stood alone, his expression unreadable. Because while Mojisola was beginning to believe she could help the village, he knew something she didn't. The real test had not even begun, and soon, everything she had started building would be pushed to its breaking point. The next few days settled into a rhythm that felt both exhausting and strangely grounding for Mojisola. Each morning she woke before the sun fully rose. The air carried a dry chill at dawn, quickly replaced by heat as the day stretched on. She would walk to the well, her steps more steady now, her grip stronger. The same women who had once whispered about her still watched, but their voices had softened, if only slightly. She no longer felt like a complete stranger. But she was not accepted either. She existed somewhere in between, and that space was fragile. Mojisola did not try to force her way into anyone's life. She simply continued doing what she knew, helping where she could, listening when someone spoke, staying silent when silence was needed. She began spending more time with the children. Musa was always the first to find her. He would appear suddenly, as if drawn by instinct, his energy cutting through the heaviness of the village. "You're coming today?" he asked one morning, following her closely. Coming where Mojisola replied with a small smile. "To the tree," he said, pointing toward a large baobab tree at the edge of the village. "The others are there." Mojisola nodded. "All right." Under the tree, a small group of children sat scattered on the ground. Some were playing with sticks, others simply watched the world pass by. A few coughed intermittently, their thin frames reflecting more than just hunger. Mojisola sat among them. At first they were quiet, but slowly she began speaking, telling simple stories, asking them questions, teaching them small things she remembered from her own childhood. They listened, not because she was extraordinary, but because she stayed. That alone was enough. From a distance, some of the villagers observed this. A few nodded. Others remained skeptical. "She wants something," one man muttered. "They all do," another replied. But not everyone agreed. An older woman, Mama Zainab, who had lived in the village longer than most, watched Mojisola carefully. "She gives without asking," Mama Zainab said quietly. "That is not common." The others said nothing, because even doubt could not fully deny what they were seeing. By midday, the heat became almost unbearable. Mojisola returned to the hut, wiping sweat from her face, her body heavy with fatigue. Inside, she found Obinna sitting quietly, as he often did. "You're pushing yourself," he said without looking up. Mojisola leaned against the wall. "I'm working," she corrected. "There's a difference." She gave a faint smile. "Not here." Obina lifted his gaze. "And what happens when your strength runs out?" Mojisola exhaled slowly. "I'll rest," she said simply. And then I'll continue." Obina studied her. "You don't stop, do you?" She met his gaze. "Do you?" That question lingered, because unlike her, Obina had stopped many things in his life. Trusting people, believing easily, allowing himself to be vulnerable. But here in this place, watching her, those things were being challenged. That afternoon, something shifted. It began with a simple moment. Mojisola was helping a young girl clean a small wound on her arm when a sharp voice cut through the air. "You think you're a healer, Tao?" The voice belonged to Hawa Dantala, Chief Sani's daughter. She stood a few steps away, her posture rigid, her expression cold. Mojisola looked up calmly. "I'm just helping," she said. Hawa stepped closer. "No one asked for your help." The children nearby grew quiet. Mojisola kept her tone gentle. She was in pain. "And you think you understand our pain?" Hawa snapped. "You just arrived." Mojisola paused. She could feel the tension building, but she didn't step back. "I don't understand everything," she admitted, "but I understand that pain is pain." Hawa let out a short, bitter laugh. "City people always think kindness is enough," she said. "You come here, do small things, and expect what gratitude?" Mojisola shook her head. "I expect nothing." "Then why are you here?" The question came sharp, direct. Mojisola hesitated, because for the first time, she didn't have a simple answer. "I came because of him," Hawa interrupted, glancing toward the direction of the hut. Her eyes narrowed. "You think staying with Obina gives you a place here?" Mojisola stood slowly. "This isn't about him." Everything here is about him, Hawa said coldly. Silence fell. The weight of those words settled heavily. Mojisola felt it. There was something deeper here, something she didn't understand. But before she could ask, Hawa stepped back. "Don't pretend to be something you're not," she said. "This village will show you who you really are." With that, she turned and walked away. The children remained silent. Mojisola slowly returned to the girl finishing what she had started. Her hands were steady. But inside, something had shifted. That evening, the atmosphere in the village felt different, less curious, more tense. Whispers carried sharper edges. Mojisola could feel it as she walked. Eyes lingered longer. Conversation stopped when she approached. When she returned to the hut, she found Obina outside, as if he had been waiting. "You spoke to Hawa," he said. It wasn't a question. Mojisola nodded. "Yes. And she doesn't trust me." Obina's expression didn't change. She doesn't trust anyone easily. Mojisola crossed her arms lightly. She said something, she added. Obina looked at her. "What that? Everything here is about you." A brief silence passed. Then Obina looked away. "People say many things," he said. Mojisola studied him. You didn't deny it. He didn't respond. Because denying it would be a lie, and confirming it would reveal too much. Mojisola exhaled slowly. "There's more to this place than you told me," she said. "Yes. And you're not going to explain it, no." The honesty in that answer was almost frustrating. Mojisola shook her head slightly. "You brought me here without telling me what I'm walking into." Obina met her gaze. "I brought you here to see it for yourself. And what if I don't like what I see? Then you can leave." The simplicity of his response stung, not because it was cruel, but because it felt distant. Mojisola looked away. For the first time since arriving, doubt crept into her thoughts. Not about the village, but about him. That night, sleep did not come easily. The sounds of the village felt heavier now, more watchful. Mojisola lay on the mat, staring into the darkness. Hawa's words echoed in her mind. "This village will show you who you really are." What did that mean? And why did it feel like a warning outside? Obina stood once again under the night sky. Chinedu's voice echoed faintly through his phone. "Everything is progressing," Chinedu said. Obina remained silent for a moment, and her Chinedu asked. Obina looked towards the hut. "She's still the same," he said. "Are you sure?" Obina's gaze hardened slightly. "Yes." Chinedu hesitated. Then the next phase, Obina closed his eyes briefly. Because he knew what that meant. More pressure, more doubt, more pain. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's time." As he ended the call, his expression darkened. Because from this point forward, the test would no longer be gentle, and Mojisola would have no idea what was coming. The shift did not happen all at once. It began subtly, like a change in the wind that only those paying attention could feel. The next morning, when Mojisola walked to the well, the usual quiet murmurs fell into complete silence. The women who had once at least acknowledged her presence now avoided her gaze entirely. One of them pulled her container away slightly as Mojisola approached, as if proximity itself had become uncomfortable. Mojisola paused. "Good morning," she said, her voice gentle as always. No one responded, not even a nod. She lowered her container into the well anyway, her movement steady, controlled. But inside, something tightened. This was different. This was not simple doubt anymore. This was distance, intentional. As she lifted the water, she noticed Hawa standing at the far end, watching. Their eyes met briefly. Hawa did not look away, but neither did she speak. Mojisola balanced the container on her head and turned, walking back towards the hut. The weight of the water pressed against her neck, but it was not heavier than the silence she had just walked through. By midday, the tension had spread. When Mojisola approached the baobab tree, the children she had been teaching were no longer there. Only Musa remained sitting on the ground, tracing lines in the dust with a stick. "Where is everyone?" she asked softly. Musa looked up at her, then quickly looked away. "They said we shouldn't come," he muttered. "Who said that?" Musa hesitated. "My mother. And others. Why?" He shrugged. "They said you bring trouble." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Mojisola knelt beside him. "Do you believe that?" she asked. Musa shook his head quickly. "No." "Then why are you still here?" she asked gently. He looked at her again. "Because you stayed when no one else did," he said. For a moment, Mojisola didn't speak. She only placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Go home," she said softly. "Your mother is worried." Musa hesitated. "But it's okay," she assured him. "We'll talk another time." Reluctantly, he stood and walked away. Mojisola remained there for a moment longer, staring at the empty space where laughter had once been. Then she stood and walked back, alone. When she reached the hut, she found Obina waiting. "You heard?" he asked. Mojisola nodded. "Yes." And she set the container down carefully. "It hurts," she said honestly. Obina watched her closely. "But you expected that," he added. Mojisola turned to him. "I expected difficulty," she said. "Not rejection without reason. There's always a reason," Obina replied. "Then what is it?" she asked. He didn't answer, because the reason was unfolding exactly as planned. Because the tension, the whispers, the distance, it was all part of the pressure. And pressure revealed truth. Mojisola studied him. "You know something," she said. "Yes. And you won't tell me." "No." Her jaw tightened slightly. For the first time since she had known him, frustration surfaced clearly in her expression. "That's not fair," she said. Obina didn't react. "This isn't about fairness." Mojisola exhaled sharply. "Then what is it about?" Obina met her gaze. "It's about seeing what remains, when everything else is taken away." The words lingered. Mojisola felt them settle deep. "And you think this will show you that?" she asked quietly. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slightly. "You're asking questions without giving answers," she said. "You're creating situations without explaining them." "Yes. And you expect me to just stay?" Obina didn't hesitate. "Yes." Silence fell. Heavy, uncomfortable. Mojisola looked away. Because in that moment something inside her cracked slightly. Not her strength, not her kindness, but her certainty. That afternoon things escalated. Mojisola was walking through the village when she noticed a small crowd forming near the center square. Voices were raised. Sharp, accusing. She hesitated, then stepped closer. At the center stood a young woman, her face streaked with anger and frustration. "My food is gone," she shouted. "Everything I kept for today gone." The crowd murmured. "Who took it?" No one saw anything. Then slowly, someone spoke. "She was near your place this morning." The voice pointed toward Mojisola. The crowd turned. All eyes landed on her. Mojisola froze. I didn't take anything she said immediately, her voice calm but firm. The young woman stepped forward. "You were there," she said. "Yes," Mojisola replied. "I passed by, and now my food is gone. That doesn't mean I took it." The woman scoffed. "Who else would? You're the outsider." The word stung. Outsider. Mojisola felt the weight of it press against her. "I don't need to steal," she said quietly. "Of course you don't," another voice muttered sarcastically. "You're here helping everyone." A few people laughed, not kindly. Mojisola looked around. The faces she had tried to help, the people she had sat with, listened to, cared for, now watching her with doubt, suspicion, distance. She swallowed slowly. "I didn't take it," she repeated. The young woman shook her head. "Words are easy," she said, "but food doesn't disappear by itself." The murmurs grew louder, and then a voice cut through the noise. "Enough." Chief Sani Dantala stepped forward. The crowd parted immediately. His presence carried authority, control. He looked at Mojisola, then at the young woman. "Accusations require proof," he said. The young woman hesitated. I don't have proof," she admitted. Chief Sani nodded slowly. "Then we do not condemn without it." A brief silence followed. Then he turned his gaze back to Mojisola. "But understand this," he added. "Trust is not given easily here." Mojisola held his gaze. "I'm not asking for trust," she said. "Then what are you asking for?" he challenged. She paused, then answered simply. "Time." The crowd fell quiet. Chief Sani studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Time will reveal truth," he said. With that, he turned and walked away. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the damage remained. Mojisola stood there, her chest tight, her thoughts heavy. She had not been punished, but she had not been believed either. When she returned to the hut, Obina was already there. He had heard. Of course he had. "You handled it well," he said. Mojisola looked at him. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Another situation for you to observe." Obina didn't answer, because the answer was yes. Mojisola laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I'm being tested," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a realization. Obina's silence confirmed it. Mojisola shook her head slowly. "And you think this is the right way to know someone?" "It's the only real way," he said. "By breaking them?" she asked. "By revealing them?" The difference was subtle, but to Mojisola it felt the same. She turned away, her arms crossing lightly. "You could have just asked me who I am," she said. "And you would have told me," Obina replied. "Yes, but would it have been true?" he asked. Mojisola didn't answer, because she understood what he meant. Words were easy, actions were harder, and under pressure, even actions could change. She exhaled slowly. "I don't like this," she said. "I know, but I'm still here." Obina looked at her. "Yes," he said quietly. She turned back to him. "And that should tell you something." He held her gaze. "It does." But it wasn't enough, not yet. Because the test was far from over. That night the village felt colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. Mojisola lay on the mat, staring into the darkness once more. Her body was tired, her heart heavier. For the first time she wondered, how much more can I take outside? Obina stood alone again, watching, waiting, because he knew what was coming next. And it would not be small. It would not be subtle. It would be the moment that would either break her or prove everything he believed. The morning after the accusation did not bring relief. It brought distance. Mojisola stepped out of the hut just as the first light touched the village, but something in the air felt heavier than before. The quiet that greeted her was no longer neutral. It was deliberate. People moved around her as if she were not there. No greetings, no eye contact, just absence. She walked toward the well again, carrying the same container, her steps steady but slower than usual. As she approached, the women who had gathered there shifted slightly, creating space, not out of respect, but avoidance. Mojisola lowered her container without a word. This time no one whispered, no one mocked, but no one helped either. She pulled the rope carefully, her hands tightening as the weight of the water rose. The effort strained her arms, but she didn't stop. When the container finally reached the top, she lifted it onto her head with quiet determination. As she turned to leave, she heard a voice behind her. She should go back to where she came from. It was soft, but not soft enough. Mojisola paused for a brief second. Then she kept walking. Because reacting would not change anything, and silence sometimes was stronger. Back at the hut, Obina sat outside watching her approach. "You heard them," he said. "It wasn't a question." Mojisola set the container down. "Yes, and you're still here." She wiped her hands slowly on her wrapper. "Yes." Obina studied her face. Why Mojisola looked at him, her eyes calm but tired. "Because leaving now would mean they were right," she said. "And if they are?" She shook her head slightly. "They're not judging truth," she replied. "They're reacting to fear. Fear of what?" "Of someone they don't understand," she said. "Of someone who might change something they're used to." Obina leaned back slightly. "And you think you can change them?" "No," she said. "But I can choose who I am while I'm here." Her answer came without hesitation, and that was what made it powerful. Later that day, Mojisola returned to the baobab tree. She didn't expect anyone to be there, and she was right. The space was empty. The ground still held faint markings from where children had once sat, but now it felt abandoned. Mojisola stood there for a moment, her chest tightening. Then she sat down anyway. Alone. She picked up a small stick and began drawing simple shapes in the dust circles, lines, letters she had once taught. Minutes passed, then more. The sun climbed higher. Still she remained. Because leaving would have been easier, and she had already decided she wouldn't choose easy. After some time, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She didn't turn immediately, but she knew. "Musa," she said gently. The boy stepped closer, hesitant. "They said I shouldn't come," he whispered. Mojisola nodded. "I know. But I wanted to," he added. She smiled faintly. "That's your choice." Musa sat down beside her, keeping a small distance at first. They didn't speak right away. They just sat. Then slowly Mojisola began again, drawing, teaching, explaining, and Musa listened. Not because he was told to, but because he chose to stay. From a distance, a few villagers noticed. They didn't approach, but they watched carefully. By afternoon, something unexpected happened. A second child appeared, then another. Not close, not openly, but near enough to hear. Mojisola didn't call them, didn't gesture. She simply continued. And one by one they edged closer, not fully returning, but no longer completely gone. It was small, fragile, but it mattered. That evening, however, the fragile balance shifted again. As Mojisola walked back toward the hut, she noticed a group gathered near the center of the village. Voices were raised, sharp, tense. She hesitated, then moved closer. At the center stood Hawa. Her expression was cold, controlled. "You think sitting with children will make them trust you?" Hawa said loudly, her voice carrying across the crowd. Mojisola stopped. "I'm not trying to make anyone trust me," she replied calmly. Hawa stepped forward. "Everything you do is a performance," she said. "You give you help, you smile." But for what, Mojisola held her gaze. For nothing. The crowd murmured. Hawa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No one does anything for nothing," she said. "Especially not here." Mojisola didn't react immediately, because she understood the anger, the doubt. But she also understood something else. Not everything had to be explained to be real. "I don't expect you to believe me," she said quietly. "Then why stay?" Hawa demanded. The question came sharp, direct. The entire village seemed to lean into the silence that followed. Mojisola took a breath, then answered. "Because leaving would be easier," she said. And I don't want to be the kind of person who only stays when it's easy. The words settled deeply. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Hawa's expression flickered for a brief second, then hardened again. Words, she said. Only words. Mojisola nodded. Yes. She didn't argue, didn't defend further, because she knew something Hawa didn't accept, yet time reveals more than words ever could. When she returned to the hut, Obina was waiting again. You're still choosing to stay, he said. Mojisola looked at him, her expression calm but firm. Yes. Even now? Yes. Obina stepped closer. And if it gets worse, she didn't hesitate. Then I'll face worse. There was no pride in her voice, no defiance, just truth. Obina studied her for a long moment. Because this was the moment many people changed, when pressure built, when acceptance disappeared, when kindness stopped being rewarded. But she hadn't changed. Not yet. And that unsettled him. Because it meant one of two things. Either she was exactly who she seemed, or she was stronger than he had anticipated. That night the village felt divided, not openly, but quietly. Some people still avoided her. Others began to question their own assumptions. Mama Zainab watched from her doorway, her eyes thoughtful. She is not leaving, she murmured to herself. And that alone meant something. Inside the hut, Mojisola lay down slowly, her body aching from the day. Her hands were sore, her mind heavy, but her heart still steady. Because despite everything, one truth remained clear. She had not come here to be accepted. She had come here because she chose to stay. And that choice, no one could take from her. Outside under the wide night sky, Obina stood once again, silent, watching. But this time something inside him was no longer entirely controlled. Because the more she endured, the more the test continued, the harder it became to separate observation from emotion. He had designed this, planned it, controlled it. But he had not planned for this. The quiet discomfort growing in his chest, because every moment she stayed, every moment she chose kindness without reward. The question was no longer just about her. It was beginning to turn toward him, and whether he deserved the truth he was searching for. But still, he didn't stop, because the final test was still coming. The crisis did not arrive with warning. It came quietly like a shadow slipping into the village unnoticed at first, until it was too late to ignore. It began with a cough. One child, then another. At first it seemed ordinary. Children in the village often fell ill, dust. Hunger and exhaustion made sickness a constant presence. But this was different. The cough lingered, it deepened, fever followed. By the third day, the small clinic at the far end of the village, barely more than a single room with a wooden table, was overwhelmed. Mojisola noticed it immediately. She had gone to check on Musa that morning when she found him lying on a mat, his body burning with fever, his breathing uneven. "Musa," she whispered, kneeling beside him. He opened his eyes weakly. "You came," he murmured. "Of course I did," she said, placing her hand gently on his forehead. The heat alarmed her. "When did this start?" she asked his mother. The woman stood nearby, her face tight with worry. 2 days ago, she said. "It was small at first. Did you take him to the clinic?" The woman shook her head. "There's nothing there," she said. "No medicine." Mojisola felt a knot form in her chest. She had seen sickness before, but this felt like something spreading. She stood quickly. "We need to get him help," she said, where the woman asked, her voice edged with desperation. "There's nothing here." Mojisola hesitated. Because the truth was clear. The village had been surviving, not living. And now survival was no longer enough. By midday, more children were showing the same symptoms: weakness, fever, persistent coughing. The small clinic could do little more than offer water and rest. Mojisola moved from one home to another, her steps urgent, her mind racing. She cleaned what she could, cooled fevers with damp cloths, encouraged mothers to keep their children hydrated. But she knew this was not enough. When she returned to the hut, she found Obina standing outside. "There's something wrong," she said immediately. "I know," he replied. Mojisola stared at him. "You know," she repeated. "And you're just standing here." Obina's expression remained calm. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The question struck her. "What do I want you to do?" she echoed. "People are getting sick, and you think I don't see that?" "Then why aren't you helping?" she demanded. Silence fell, because this was part of the test, and helping too soon would change everything. Mojisola shook her head, frustration rising. "I don't understand you," she said. Obina looked at her. "You're not supposed to," he replied. The distance in his voice stung more than she expected. For a moment she felt something close to anger, but she pushed it down, because anger would not solve anything. Action might. That evening, Mojisola made a decision. She returned to the hut, opened her small bag, and took out the cloth bundle that held her savings. It wasn't much, just enough to survive a few more weeks in Lagos. But here, it could mean something more. She held it in her hands for a moment, her thoughts steadying. Then she stepped outside. Obina watched as she approached him. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm going to the nearest town," she said. "It's far," he replied. "I know, it's not safe to travel at night." "Then I'll leave at first light," she said. Obina studied her. "And when you get there, I'll buy medicine," she said simply. "With that?" he asked, nodding toward the small bundle. "It's what I have." "And when it's gone?" Mojisola met his gaze. "Then it's gone." The answer came without hesitation, and that was what made it real. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, Mojisola began her journey. The path out of the village was long and uneven, stretching through dry land and scattered trees. She walked alone, step by step, the weight of her decision pressing quietly against her, but never stopping her. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The heat grew intense, but she kept moving, because every step forward meant something for the children she had left behind. By midday, she reached a small roadside town. It was not much, but it had more than the village. Small shops, a pharmacy, a few vehicles passing through. Mojisola went straight to the pharmacy, her heart pounding slightly. "I need medicine," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. The pharmacist looked at her. "For what?" She explained the symptoms quickly. Fever, cough, weakness. The man listened, then began gathering what he could, basic medication enough to help manage the illness. "It's not much," he said, "but it will help." Mojisola nodded. How much? He named the price. It was almost everything she had. She didn't hesitate. She placed the money on the counter and watched as her savings, her security, disappeared. But in that moment, she didn't feel loss. She felt purpose. The journey back was harder. Her body was already tired. Now she carried the added weight of the medicine, but she didn't stop, because stopping meant delay, and delay meant risk. When she finally reached the village, the sun was beginning to set. Her steps slowed slightly as exhaustion caught up with her. But when she saw the first familiar huts, she pushed forward. The villagers noticed her return. Some watched from a distance, others whispered quietly. But this time the whispers were different, not sharp, not accusing, but uncertain. Mojisola didn't stop. She went straight to Musa's home. His mother looked up in surprise as she entered. "You came back," she said. Mojisola nodded, kneeling beside Musa. "I brought medicine," she said. Carefully, she began administering it, following the instructions she had been given. Musa stirred slightly, his breathing easing just a little. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. Word spread quickly. By nightfall, more people came, quietly, hesitantly, asking for help. Mojisola gave what she could, carefully dividing the medicine, ensuring it reached those who needed it most. She didn't question, didn't hesitate, didn't remind anyone of what had happened before. She simply helped. From a distance, Obina watched, as he had always done. But this time, something was different, because this was no longer small acts of kindness. This was sacrifice, real, costly, irreversible. He had expected kindness. He had planned for it. But this level of giving, without hesitation, without expectation, it unsettled him, because it left him with a question he had not fully prepared for. What happens when someone gives more than the test demands? Later that night, Mojisola sat outside the hut, her body completely drained. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. Her mind struggled to stay focused. But her heart was calm. Because for the first time since arriving, she had done something that truly mattered. Obina stepped closer. "You used everything he said?" Mojisola nodded. "Yes. And now you have nothing left." She looked up at him. "I have enough," she said. "Enough for what?" She gave a faint, tired smile. "For today." The simplicity of her answer lingered, because in a world that always asked for more, she had chosen to give everything. As the village settled into uneasy rest, something had changed. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. A shift in perception, a crack in doubt, a quiet acknowledgement that could no longer be ignored. Mojisola had not just stayed, she had sacrificed. And that was something no one could deny, but far beyond the quiet of the village. The test was not over, because sacrifice was only one part of the truth. And what came next would challenge something even deeper, not just what she could give, but what she could endure. The days after the medicine arrived did not bring instant relief, but they brought something else: hope. It showed itself in small, fragile ways: Musa sitting up for a few minutes without coughing, a child asking for water instead of lying silent, a mother sleeping for the first time in days because her child's fever had dropped. Mojisola noticed every change, not as victory, but as proof that something she had done mattered. She moved through this village with quiet focus, checking on the sick, dividing what little medicine remained, reminding people how to care for one another. She didn't rush. She didn't claim credit. She simply continued. But beneath that fragile hope, something else was growing: expectation. People who had once doubted her now came to her first. "Do you have more? Can you check him? What should we do next?" The questions followed her everywhere. At first she answered them all, but slowly reality began to press in. The medicine was almost gone, her strength was fading, and there was nothing left to give. One afternoon, as the sun hung heavily in the sky, Mojisola sat outside the hut. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her breath slower than usual. Obina stood a few steps away, watching. "You're tired," he said. Mojisola gave a faint smile. "Yes. And yet you continue." She nodded. "Yes." Why? Mojisola looked at him, her eyes steady but softer now. "Because stopping won't make anything better," she said. Obina stepped closer. "And continuing will." She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I don't know." The truth hung between them. For the first time, uncertainty had entered her voice. Not doubt in who she was, but doubt in what she could actually change. And that was new. Later that day, the tension in the village shifted again. This time it wasn't silent, it was spoken. A man approached Mojisola near the well, his expression tight. "My son is still sick," he said. Mojisola nodded. "I'll come see him," she replied. He didn't move. "You gave medicine to others," he continued. "Why not him?" Mojisola frowned slightly. I gave where it was needed most, she said gently. He is my only son, the man snapped. Is that not need? Mojisola felt the weight of his words. I understand, she said, but there wasn't enough for everyone. The man shook his head. Then why did you come? He demanded. If you cannot help all of us? The question cut deeper than the accusation before, because this time, it wasn't about doubt. It was about expectation. And expectation was harder to carry. Mojisola took a breath. I came to help where I could, she said. And that is not enough, he replied sharply. The words lingered, and for the first time, Mojisola didn't have an answer. That evening, the whispers returned. But they had changed. She helped some, not all. She chose who to save. What kind of kindness is that Mojisola heard them? Every word, every doubt, every shift in perception. She stood outside the hut, her arms folded lightly, her thoughts heavy. Obina approached slowly. They're turning again, he said. Mojisola didn't look at him. I know. And she exhaled. I didn't expect it to be easy, she said, but you didn't expect this either. She turned to him. No, she admitted. Obina studied her face. And what does this change? Mojisola was quiet for a moment. Then she answered. It doesn't change what I did, she said, but it changes how they see it. And that matters? She nodded. Yes. Why? Because people don't just need help, she said. They need to feel seen. Fairly. Obina tilted his head slightly. And you think you were unfair? Mojisola hesitated. I think I was limited, she said. And that's different, yes. Obina looked at her for a long moment. Because this was the part many people struggled with. When kindness met limitation, when giving was no longer enough, when effort didn't lead to appreciation. This was where people changed, where frustration replaced compassion, where resentment began. But Mojisola had not crossed that line. Not yet. That night, the distance between her and the village grew again. People no longer approached her as quickly. Some avoided her. Others watched with quiet judgment. The fragile trust she had built now stood on uncertain ground. Mojisola sat inside the hut, her back against the wall, her eyes closed. Her body was exhausted. But it was her mind that refused to rest. Was I wrong? The question surfaced slowly, not loud, not overwhelming, but present. She thought about the children she had helped, the ones she hadn't been able to reach, the expectations she had unintentionally created. And for the first time since arriving, she felt something she hadn't allowed before. Doubt. Not in her intentions, but in her impact. Outside, Obinna stood alone again. His phone buzzed softly. Chinedu's voice came through. She gave everything Chinedu said. Yes, Obinna replied. And now Obinna looked towards the hut. Now we see what remains, he said. Chinedu was silent for a moment. Do you think she'll stay? He asked. Obinna didn't answer immediately. Because this was the turning point, where many people chose themselves, chose comfort, chose to leave. I don't know, he said finally. And for the first time, that uncertainty was real. The next morning, Mojisola woke up later than usual. Her body refused to move as quickly as before. When she finally stepped outside, the village was already active. But no one came to her. No one called her name. No one asked for help. It was as if she had faded into the background. Mojisola stood there for a moment, taking it in. Then she picked up the empty container and walked to the well. Not because she had to, but because routine gave her something to hold on to. As she reached the well, Mama Zainab stood nearby. This time the older woman did not look away. You are still here, Mama Zainab said. Mojisola nodded. Yes. Mama Zainab studied her. You helped them, she said. I tried, and now they question you. Mojisola gave a small, tired smile. Yes. Mama Zainab was quiet for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. That is how people are. Mojisola looked at her. You don't seem surprised? Mama Zainab shook her head slowly. People trust slowly, she said, but they expect quickly. The words settled deeply. Mojisola nodded. I see that now. Mama Zainab stepped closer. And what will you do? The question was simple, but it carried weight. Mojisola looked out across the village, the same huts, the same people, the same struggle. Nothing had changed, except how they saw her. She took a breath, then answered, I will stay. Mama Zainab nodded slowly. Then you must be stronger than their doubt, she said. Mojisola met her gaze. I will try. As the day continued, Mojisola returned to her quiet routine, not seeking attention, not trying to prove anything, just being present, helping when she could, stepping back when she couldn't. And in that quiet persistence, something began to shift again. Not loudly, not quickly, but subtly. Because while doubt had returned, so had memory. And people remembered who had stayed, who had given, who had not walked away. But somewhere beneath that slow shift, a deeper tension was building. Because the test was not finished, not even close. What had come so far was only preparing for what was next, and what was next would not just test Mojisola's kindness, it would test her trust, her heart, and her ability to endure something far more painful than rejection, betrayal. The morning began like any other, quiet, heavy, uncertain, but beneath that familiar stillness, something had already been set in motion. Mojisola did not know it yet. She moved through the village with the same calm persistence she had chosen the day before, no longer trying to fix everything, no longer stretching beyond what she had left, but still present, still steady. She greeted Mama Zainab with a nod at the well. She checked on Musa, whose fever had dropped, but whose strength had not fully returned. She sat briefly with a woman whose child still struggled to breathe. Small actions, measured, careful, she had learned, and the village was watching. By midday, a gathering formed again in the center square. This time it wasn't loud at first. It was tense, controlled. Mojisola noticed it as she walked past her steps, slowing instinctively. People were standing closer than usual, their voices low but urgent. Heads turned as she approached. That was enough. She knew. Something was wrong. Before she could turn away, a voice called out sharply. Mojisola. She stopped. The voice belonged to Chief Sani. He stood at the center of the gathering, his presence commanding as always. Beside him stood Hawa and a few others. Mojisola recognized their faces, serious, guarded. Come forward, Chief Sani said. It was not a request. Mojisola felt her chest tighten slightly, but she stepped forward anyway. Because walking away would only confirm what they already suspected, and she had come too far to retreat now. As she reached the center, she noticed something placed on the ground between them, a small cloth bundle. Her breath caught for a brief moment, because she recognized it. It looked like the one she had carried her savings in. But hers was gone. She had spent it. Still, something about it felt wrong. Chief Sani gestured toward the bundle. Do you know what this is? He asked. Mojisola shook her head slowly. No. Hawa stepped forward. It was found behind the hut you are staying in, she said. A murmur moved through the crowd. Mojisola's heart began to pound, not from fear, but from realization. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Chief Sani's gaze remained fixed on her. It contains money, he said. More than most here would see in months. Mojisola frowned slightly. I don't understand, she said. Then let me make it simple. Hawa replied, her voice sharp. You said you had nothing left. I don't. And yet this was found where you sleep. The implication hung heavy in the air. The crowd shifted, eyes narrowed, whispers grew louder. Mojisola looked around, searching faces not for support, but for truth. But all she saw was doubt. Again, stronger this time. "I didn't put that there," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Of course you didn't," someone muttered sarcastically. "Money appears on its own now," another added. Mojisola swallowed slowly. This was different from the accusation before. This had been planned, and whoever had planned it wanted her to fall. Chief Sani raised his hand slightly, silencing the murmurs. "Words are not enough," he said. "Not anymore." Mojisola met his gaze. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "The truth," he replied. "I'm telling you the truth." And yet, he said slowly, "Truth without proof is just another story." The words pressed heavily against her, because she had no proof, no way to explain something she didn't do. Hawa stepped closer. "You came here with nothing," she said. "You gave some, yes, but perhaps not all. Perhaps you kept something hidden." Mojisola shook her head. "No, but why should we believe you?" Hawa challenged. Silence followed, deep, unforgiving, because belief was not something she could demand. It was something that had to be given, and right now, it wasn't. From the edge of the crowd, Obina watched, his expression unreadable, his hands still. This moment had been set, prepared, controlled, but something about it did not feel as controlled as before, because this was no longer just pressure. This was pain, real, visible, and it was directed at her. Mojisola stood in the center, her shoulders straight, her eyes steady. But inside, something was breaking, not her strength, but her trust. She turned her gaze toward Obina. For a brief moment their eyes met, and in that moment, she waited, not for him to explain, not for him to fix anything, but for him to stand, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He remained still, silent, distant. And that silence spoke louder than everything else. Mojisola felt it settle deep in her chest. A quiet, painful understanding. She was alone, not just in the village, but in this moment. Chief Sani's voice broke the silence again. "If you are innocent," he said, "then you will accept whatever judgment clears your name." Mojisola turned back to him. "What kind of judgment?" she asked. He paused, then answered, "You will leave." The words hit harder than she expected. "Leave," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "If you have nothing to hide, then leaving will prove you have no reason to stay." The logic was flawed, but in that moment, logic didn't matter. Perception did. And perception had already turned against her. Mojisola stood still, her mind racing, her heart heavy. She had come here by choice. She had stayed through doubt, through rejection, through sacrifice. And now, she was being told to leave. Not because she failed, but because she could not prove what she never did. She looked around one last time, at the faces, the place, the people she had tried to help. Then her eyes found Obina again, still silent, still watching, still distant, and something inside her shifted. Because this was no longer about the village. It was about him, about everything he had brought her into, without explanation, without support, without truth. She took a slow breath, then spoke. "If leaving is what you believe proves the truth," she said quietly, "then I will leave." The crowd fell silent, not satisfied, but surprised, because they had expected resistance, argument, desperation. But not this, not calm acceptance. Chief Sani studied her. "You agree?" he asked. Mojisola nodded. "Yes. And you do not fight this." She shook her head. No. Why? Her answer came slowly, but clearly. Because I know who I am, she said, and I don't need to prove that by staying where I am not wanted. The words settled deeply. Even Hawa's expression flickered for a brief moment, but she said nothing. Mojisola turned, not in defeat, but in quiet dignity. She walked away from the center of the village, her steps steady despite the weight pressing against her chest. She did not look back, because looking back would only make it harder. At the hut, she packed her small bag again. This time it felt different, heavier. Not because of what she carried, but because of what she was leaving behind. Obinna stood at the doorway, watching, still silent. Mojisola finished tying her bag. Then she looked at him. For the first time since she had known him, her eyes held something new. Not anger, not sadness, but distance. You knew, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Obina didn't respond, because denying it would be pointless. Mojisola nodded slowly. I trusted you, she added. Her voice didn't break, but it didn't need to. The weight of those words was enough. She lifted her bag and walked past him, without waiting, without asking, without turning back. Outside, the village watched, some in silence, some in uncertainty, some in quiet regret. But no one stopped her. As Mojisola reached the edge of the village, the path stretching ahead of her, she paused for just a second. Not to reconsider, but to breathe. Then she took another step, and another, leaving everything behind. Behind her, Obina remained standing, still, silent, but no longer unaffected. Because something had changed, not in her, but in him. And for the first time, the test no longer felt like control, it felt like loss. The path out of the village stretched long and uneven, cutting through dry land and scattered trees that offered little shade. Dust rose beneath Mojisola's feet, with every step clinging to her skin, settling into the folds of her wrapper. But she did not slow down. Not because she wasn't tired, but because stopping would mean thinking, and thinking would mean feeling everything she was trying to hold together. The village behind her grew smaller with each step. The voices faded. The eyes that had once watched her, judged her, doubted her, disappeared into the distance. But one thing did not fade. Obina's silence. It followed her. Heavy, unanswered, unfinished. She walked for a long time before she finally stopped. Not because she had reached anywhere, but because her body demanded it. She lowered her bag slowly and sat beneath a small tree, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. For the first time since she left, she allowed herself to feel it. The weight, the disappointment, the quiet, aching truth. I trusted you. The words she had spoken replayed in her mind, not as accusation, but as realization. She closed her eyes briefly, because what hurt the most was not the village, not the accusations, not even the humiliation. It was him, the one person who had seen her, watched her, understood her, and still chose silence. She exhaled slowly, pressing her hands together to steady herself. Keep moving, she whispered. Not because she was strong, but because she refused to break here. Not like this. Back in the village, the silence she left behind did not settle easily. It lingered, uncomfortable, unresolved. The center square, which had been filled with voices just hours before now, felt strangely hollow. People moved around, but something had shifted, because they had expected something else. Resistance, anger, a fight. But what they saw instead was quiet dignity. And that was harder to ignore. Mama Zainab stood near her doorway watching the path where Mojisola had disappeared. She didn't fight, she murmured. A woman beside her shook her head slowly. She didn't need to. The words hung between them. Because deep down, they knew. Something about what had just happened was not right. At the hut, Obina stood alone. The space felt emptier than it had any right to. Her presence, once quiet, steady, constant, was gone, and in its place, silence. Real silence. Not the kind he had controlled, not the kind he had observed, but the kind that revealed something he hadn't expected. He stepped inside slowly, his gaze moving across the small space. The mat. The corner where she had kept her bag. The lantern she had used. Everything was the same. But it felt different. Because she was no longer there, and for the first time since the test began, he felt something he had not planned for. Regret. Not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable. His phone buzzed in his hand. Chinedu. Obina didn't answer immediately, because he already knew what would be said, that everything had gone according to plan, that the final phase had been executed, that the result was clear. But something inside him resisted that conclusion. Still he answered. She left, Chinedu said. Yes, Obina replied. And now Obina looked toward the doorway, toward the path she had taken. We proceed. Chinedu continued. The reveal is ready. The village is prepared. Obina was silent. Sir Chinedu pressed. Obina closed his eyes briefly, because for the first time, proceeding did not feel simple. Not yet, he said. There was a pause. That was not the plan, Chinedu replied carefully. I know. Then why delay? Obina opened his eyes. Because something is missing, he said. What Obina didn't answer immediately, because the truth was difficult to admit. Her choice, he said finally. Chinedu frowned on the other end of the line. She already made it, he said. She stayed. She sacrificed. She endured. That is enough. Obina's voice lowered slightly. No, he said. That was before. Before what? Before we took everything from her, Obina replied. Silence followed. Because now, this was no longer just a test. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. Far ahead on the road, Mojisola continued walking. Her steps were slower now. The heat pressed harder. The exhaustion settled deeper. But she did not turn back, because turning back would mean returning to something that had already broken. Hours passed before she reached the edge of the roadside town she had visited before. The same small buildings, the same quiet movement. But this time, it felt different, because she was not arriving with purpose. She was arriving with loss. She walked toward a shaded area near a small shop and sat down, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she had been holding back. Her hands trembled slightly, her breathing uneven, but her eyes remained steady, because even now, she refused to let herself fall apart completely. A woman nearby noticed her. You look tired, she said gently. Mojisola nodded faintly. I am. Where are you coming from? Mojisola hesitated, then answered simply. A village. And where are you going? Mojisola looked ahead, at the road stretching forward, at the uncertainty waiting beyond it. I don't know, she said. The honesty of her answer surprised even her, because for the first time in a long time, she truly didn't. Back in the village, the tension continued to build, not outwardly, but internally. Hawa stood near the center, her arms crossed, her expression controlled. She left, someone said. Hawa nodded. Yes. And if she was telling the truth? The question came quietly, but it landed. Hawa didn't respond immediately, because for the first time, doubt had turned inward, not toward Mojisola, but toward the situation itself. She should have stayed and proven it, Hawa said finally. But even as she spoke, the words felt weaker than before, because deep down, she had seen it. The way Mojisola walked away. Not defeated, not guilty, but certain. And certainty like that was hard to fake. As the sun began to set, Obina stepped out of the hut. The sky stretched wide above him, painted in fading orange and deepening blue. The village moved quietly around him. But his focus remained fixed on one thing. The path, the one she had taken. Because now, everything had changed. The test was no longer about her kindness, or her sacrifice, or her endurance. It was about something far more difficult, what she would choose after everything had been taken from her, and whether he would have the courage to face that answer. By the time the sun rose again, the village no longer felt the same. Nothing had visibly changed. The huts still stood in their worn lines. The well still drew its steady line of early risers, and the dust still lifted under every passing foot. But beneath the surface, something unsettled had taken root. It was quiet, but it was growing. Mama Zainab was the first to speak it aloud. She left too easily, she said, standing by the well, her voice low but firm. A younger woman frowned. Easily. She walked away with nothing. Mama Zainab shook her head slowly, not easily like surrender, easily like someone who knows they are not guilty. The women around her fell silent, because that distinction mattered. And now it lingered. Near the center of the village, Musa sat alone beneath the baobab tree. The same place where Mojisola had once gathered the children, the same place where laughter had slowly returned. Now it was quiet again. He traced shapes in the dust with a stick, his movements slower than usual. She said she would come back, he muttered. No one answered, because no one had told him otherwise. Across the village, whispers moved differently now, not sharp, not accusing, but questioning. Did anyone actually see her take it? No? Then why did we believe it so quickly? Because it was found near her place. But that doesn't mean it was hers. The conversation stayed low, careful, because doubt had shifted, not toward Mojisola anymore, but toward the judgment itself. Hawa heard it, every whisper, every question, and it unsettled her. She stood near her father's compound, her arms folded, her expression tense. They are talking, she said. Chief Sani remained seated, his posture calm, his face unreadable. People always talk, he replied. This is different, Hawa insisted. They're questioning the decision. Chief Sani's gaze lifted slightly. And what do you think Hawa hesitated? Because until now she had been certain that Mojisola was pretending, certain that her kindness was a performance, certain that pushing her would reveal something hidden. But what she had seen did not match that belief. She didn't defend herself, Hawa said slowly. She had no proof, Chief Sani replied. That's not what I mean, Hawa said. She didn't fight, she didn't argue, she just accepted it. Chief Sani watched her carefully. And what does that tell you? Hawa didn't answer immediately, because the truth was uncomfortable. It tells me she believed she didn't need to, she said finally. Silence followed, because that answer carried weight. At the edge of the village, Obina stood once again, looking out toward the path Mojisola had taken. He hadn't moved far since the night before, hadn't spoken much, hadn't revealed anything, but inside, something was shifting. Chinedu stood a few steps behind him. We cannot delay this any longer, he said. Obina didn't turn. She left without knowing the truth, Chinedu continued. That was not the intended conclusion. Obina's voice was quiet. The conclusion is not finished. Chinedu frowned slightly. With respect, sir, the test has already proven what you needed to see. Obina exhaled slowly. No, he said. It has shown me what she is when she is given nothing, and that is not enough. Obina turned slightly, now his eyes sharper. I need to know what she is, when she is hurt. The words landed. Because that was a different test entirely. Far away in the small roadside town, Mojisola sat outside the same shop where she had rested the day before. Her body had recovered slightly, but her thoughts had not settled. She had not decided where to go next, had not chosen a path forward, because something inside her was still processing what had happened. The accusations, the silence, Obina. That last moment when he said nothing. She closed her eyes briefly, because no matter how much she tried to move past it, it stayed, not as anger, but as a quiet, lingering question. Why a man passed by carrying goods on his head. A woman argued with a vendor nearby. Life continued around her, but she remained still, not stuck, just pausing. For the first time in a long time, she was not reacting to need, not responding to others. She was simply alone with herself. And that space was unfamiliar. Back in the village, something unexpected happened. Musa stood up suddenly from beneath the tree and began walking toward the center. His steps were small, but determined. Where are you going? A woman called out. To Chief Sani, he replied. The woman frowned. Why Musa didn't stop. Because she didn't take anything he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. People began to notice, to follow. Not because he was important, but because he was certain. By the time Musa reached the center square, a small group had gathered behind him. Chief Sani looked up as the boy approached. Yes, he said. Musa stood in front of him, his small frame steady despite the attention. She didn't take it, he said. Chief Sani studied him. And how do you know that Musa swallowed slightly? Because she gave everything he said. I saw her. She had nothing left. A murmur moved through the crowd. Hawa stepped forward. That doesn't prove anything, she said. Musa shook his head. It proves enough, he replied. The simplicity of his words struck deeper than expected. Because sometimes, truth didn't need complexity. Mama Zainab stepped forward next. I watched her, she said, every day. She did not hide anything. She did not keep anything. Others began to speak. She helped my child. She came even when we turned her away. She stayed when she could have left. The voices were not loud, but they were steady. And together, they formed something stronger than accusation. They formed doubt, not about her, but about what had been done. Hawa looked around, her expression tightening. This changes nothing, she said. We found the money where she stayed. And who placed it there? Mama Zainab asked quietly. The question cut through the air, because no one had asked it before. Not directly, not clearly. And now? It demanded an answer. Hawa's silence was brief, but noticeable. Chief Sani's gaze shifted slightly, because for the first time, the situation was no longer under control. At the edge of the gathering, Obina watched. Every word, every shift, every realization, this was the moment. Not of reveal, but of truth rising on its own. Without direction, without force, without him. And that was something he had not planned. Back in the town, Mojisola stood up slowly. Her body felt stronger now, her mind clearer. She picked up her bag, not because she had decided where to go, but because she knew one thing: she would not stay still forever. As she stepped forward, she paused for just a moment, her thoughts turning briefly. Back to the village, back to what she had left behind, back to the unanswered question. Then she exhaled softly and took a step. Not backward, not forward with certainty, but forward, with herself. Back in the village, the tension reached its peak, because now the question was no longer about Mojisola. It was about the truth, and the truth was beginning to surface, whether anyone was ready for it or not. The tension in the village did not explode. It tightened, like a rope pulled slowly, inch by inch, until every fiber strained under pressure. No one spoke loudly anymore, because now everyone was thinking, and thinking was more dangerous than shouting. At the center square, the small crowd that had gathered did not disperse. They remained, watching, waiting. Musa stood quietly, his small hands clenched at his sides, his eyes fixed on Chief Sani. Mama Zainab stood beside him, her posture firm, her gaze unwavering. Hawa shifted slightly, her confidence no longer as solid as before, and at the edge of it all, Obinna stepped forward. For the first time since everything began. He moved into the center. The air changed immediately, because even without knowing why, people felt it. Authority, control, something deeper than the quiet man they thought they knew. Chief Sani's eyes narrowed slightly. "You have been silent," he said. Obinna nodded. "Yes. And now you choose to speak, yes." The simplicity of his answer carried weight. Hawa looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. "This is not your place," she said. "This concerns the village." Obinna's gaze shifted to her. "It has always concerned me," he replied. The tone was different now. Not distant, not quiet, but controlled, measured, certain. A murmur spread through the crowd, because this was not the Obinna they had seen before. Chief Sani studied him carefully. "Then speak," he said. Obinna took a step forward. His eyes moved across the faces in front of him, the same people who had doubted, judged, accused, the same people who were now questioning. And then he spoke. "The money was placed there intentionally," he said. Silence fell instantly, because the words did not suggest, they declared. Hawa's eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked. Obinna didn't look at her. "I mean," he said calmly, "it was not hers." A ripple moved through the crowd. Chief Sani's expression hardened. "Then whose is it?" he demanded. Obinna paused, not because he didn't know, but because this moment could not be rushed. "It was mine," he said. The silence deepened, heavy, unforgiving. Hawa stepped back slightly. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "Why would you?" "Because this was never about the money," Obinna interrupted. His voice was still calm, but now it carried something else. Truth. Chief Sani's gaze sharpened. "Then what is this about?" he asked. Obinna turned fully toward the crowd. This, he said, was a test. The word echoed. Test. It moved through the people slowly, as if they were trying to understand it. A test of what someone asked. Obinna's eyes didn't waver. "Of character," he said. "Of truth. Of who someone is. When everything is taken from them." The murmurs returned. Confusion. Disbelief. Hawa shook her head. "You're saying all of this, everything that happened was planned, yes. And you expect us to believe that Obinna met her gaze. I don't expect anything," he said. "I am telling you what is." Chief Sani stepped forward now, his authority no longer unquestioned. "You accuse this village of playing games," he said. Obinna's expression remained steady. "No," he replied. "I say this village was part of something it did not fully see." The words landed carefully, because they did not attack, but they revealed. Chief Sani's eyes narrowed further. "Explain," he said. Obinna took a breath, then spoke clearly. "I did not bring her here by accident," he said. "I brought her here to see who she truly is." "And what did you see?" Mama Zainab asked quietly. Obinna's gaze softened slightly. "I saw someone who gave when she had little," he said. who stayed when she was rejected, who sacrificed without asking for anything in return. The crowd listened, not interrupting, because they had seen it too. But that was not enough, Obina continued. I needed to know what she would do when everything turned against her. And so you created this? Hawa asked, her voice rising slightly. Yes. The honesty was undeniable and uncomfortable. Hawa took a step back. You humiliated her, she said. I tested her, Obina replied. You let us accuse her, she continued. I let the truth reveal itself, he said. Chief Sani's voice cut through. And the money, he asked. Obina nodded. Placed behind the hut, he said. To create doubt, to force judgment, to see what would happen. And what happened, Mama Zainab said softly, is that we failed. The words fell into the silence. Heavy, because they were true. Obina turned slightly, looking out toward the path where Mojisola had left. She did not defend herself, he said. She did not fight. She did not beg. He paused. Then added, she chose dignity over being believed. The words struck deeper than anything before, because now the truth was clear, not just about her, but about them. Hawa's voice came quieter now. Why, she asked. Obina looked at her. Because I have seen too many people change when circumstances change, he said. Too many people who appear kind, until it costs them something. And she, Hawa, asked. Obina's answer came without hesitation. She did not change. Silence followed. Because that was the conclusion. Chief Sani stepped back slowly. For the first time, his authority felt shaken. Not broken, but questioned. You used this village, he said. Obina shook his head slightly. I revealed it, he replied. The distinction mattered, even if it was difficult to accept. From the edge of the crowd, a man spoke. She left, he said. Yes, Obina replied. And now the man asked. Obina didn't answer immediately. Because now, everything depended on what came next. Far away on the road beyond the town, Mojisola walked again. She had chosen a direction, not because she knew where it led, but because standing still was no longer an option. Her steps were steady, her expression calm, but her heart still carried the weight of what she had left behind, and the question that remained unanswered. Back in the village, the truth had settled, but it did not bring relief. It brought responsibility, because now they understood what they had done, what they had allowed, what they had failed to see. Obina turned back toward the village. His voice was quieter now. But this is not finished, he said. The people looked at him. Because the test was never just about her, he continued. It was about all of us, and what we choose when faced with truth. His gaze moved across them, one by one. And then he said the words that would change everything. We are going to find her. The crowd stirred, not in resistance, but in something new, purpose. Because now, the story was no longer about testing someone's heart. It was about proving whether they had one at all. The decision to find Mojisola did not unfold with noise or urgency. It moved quietly, like everything that had finally begun to matter. At dawn, the village gathered again, not as before, not with suspicion or judgment, but with something heavier, awareness. No one spoke loudly, no one argued. Even the children seemed to sense that something important was happening. Chief Sani stood at the center, his posture still strong, but no longer unquestioned. Beside him, Hawa remained silent, her earlier certainty replaced by something far more difficult to carry. Understanding. Mama Zainab stepped forward first. We cannot undo what has been done, she said, but we can choose what we do next. Her voice was not loud, but it reached everyone. Obina stood a few steps away, his gaze fixed on the path leading out of the village. "She will not be far," he said, "but she will not wait forever." The words carried urgency not in tone but in truth. Chief Sani nodded once. "Then we move now," he said. For the first time, the authority in his voice aligned with something deeper than control. Responsibility. The group that left the village was small, not because others didn't care, but because this was not a journey for many voices. It was a journey for those willing to face what they had done. Obina, Chief Sani, Hawa, Mama Zainab, and Musa, who refused to stay behind. "I want to see her," he said simply. No one stopped him. The road stretched long beneath the morning sun. Dust rose with each step. Silence followed them. Not empty, but filled with thought. Hawa walked slightly behind the others, her arms folded, her gaze fixed ahead. She had replayed every moment, every word she had spoken, every doubt she had held. And now, none of it felt certain anymore. She was not pretending, she said suddenly. No one answered immediately, because they all knew. But hearing it said made it real. Chief Sani glanced at her briefly. "No," he said, "she was not." Hawa swallowed. "And we still—" "Yes," he interrupted. The word carried no defense, only acceptance. Mama Zainab walked beside Musa, her steps steady despite her age. "She gave more than she had," she said quietly. "And we asked for proof." Musa looked up. "She didn't need to prove anything," he said. "No," Mama Zainab replied. "But we needed to learn that." They reached the roadside town by midday, the same place where Mojisola had rested, the same place where she had sat, alone. Obina scanned the area quickly. "Ask," he said. They moved through the small market, speaking to vendors, passers-by, anyone who might have seen her. A young woman, traveling alone. Calm, quiet, carrying a small bag. Some shook their heads, others paused. Then finally a woman near a food stall nodded. "Yes," she said. "She was here yesterday." Obina stepped forward. "Where did she go?" he asked. The woman pointed down the road that way. Hawa exhaled softly. "She kept moving," she murmured. "Of course she did," Mama Zainab said. "She always moves forward." They continued. The road stretched farther now, less traveled, more uncertain. But Obina did not slow, because something inside him had shifted completely. This was no longer a test, no longer observation. This was pursuit, not of answers, but of something he now understood he could lose. Far ahead, Mojisola walked steadily. Her steps were no longer rushed, no longer uncertain. She had found a rhythm, not because she knew where she was going, but because she had accepted that not knowing was part of moving forward. The sun was high, the air dry, but she didn't mind, because for the first time since leaving the village, her thoughts had quieted. Not completely, but enough. She had stopped asking why, stopped replaying what had happened, stopped searching for explanations, because some things did not need to be understood to be accepted. She had done what she believed was right, and that was enough. When she heard footsteps behind her, she didn't turn immediately, because she had learned something. Not every sound needed a reaction, but when the footsteps didn't fade, she slowed, then stopped, and finally, she turned. The group stood a short distance away. Dust clung to their clothes. Exhaustion showed in their faces, but they were there. Obina stepped forward. Mojisola. Her name hung in the air, familiar but distant. Mojisola looked at them, at all of them, her expression calm, unreadable. "You came," she said quietly. Obina nodded. "Yes." Why, the question was simple, but it carried everything. Obina took a breath. "Because the truth is not finished," he said. Mojisola held his gaze. "It was finished for me," she replied. The words landed. Not harsh, not emotional, but final. Hawa stepped forward slightly. "We were wrong," she said. Mojisola looked at her, but didn't respond. Mama Zainab spoke next. "We judged too quickly," she said. "We asked for proof when your actions had already spoken." Mojisola listened, but her expression did not change. Chief Sani stepped forward, his voice steady. "I allowed something unjust," he said, "and I accept that." Silence followed. Because these words were not easy for him, but they were necessary. Mojisola nodded once. "I hear you," she said. Then she turned her gaze back to Obina. "And you?" she asked. The question was direct, focused, unavoidable. Obina stepped closer. "I tested you," he said. "I know. I pushed you beyond what was fair, yes. I let you stand alone." Mojisola's eyes didn't leave his. Yes, the truth sat between them. Clear, undeniable. Obina's voice lowered slightly. "And I was wrong." The words came without hesitation, because for the first time, he was not observing, he was admitting. Mojisola exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. "You wanted to see who I was," she said. "Yes. And now you've seen." Yes, she nodded. Then asked the question that mattered most. "And who are you?" The silence that followed was different, because this time, the test had shifted. Now it was his turn. Obina did not look away. "I am someone who forgot that truth doesn't need to be forced," he said. "I am someone who believed pressure reveals everything, but ignored what it destroys." He paused, then added quietly, "And I am someone who is asking for another chance." Mojisola looked at him, long, carefully, not searching for words, but for sincerity, because she had learned something too. Kindness does not mean weakness, and forgiveness is not automatic. The road stretched behind her, open, free, untouched. She could walk away, and no one would stop her. Not now, not after everything. But instead, she took a step forward, not fully closing the distance, but not turning away either. "You cannot test someone's heart," she said quietly, "and expect it to remain untouched." Obina nodded. "I understand that now. And if I come back," she continued, "it will not be because you asked." He nodded again. "I know. It will be because I choose to." "Yes." Silence settled. Then Mojisola looked past him, at the others, at the village they represented, at the place that had broken her and revealed her. Then she spoke. "I will come back," she said. The words were soft, but they carried everything. "Not for the test," she added, "but for the people who still need what I can give." Musa smiled immediately. Mama Zainab closed her eyes briefly. Hawa lowered her gaze, and Chief Sani nodded slowly. Because this was not forgiveness. Not completely, but it was something deeper. Choice. As they began the journey back together, the road no longer felt uncertain, because now it was not about where it led. It was about who they had become walking it. And for the first time, no one needed to test that. Because the truth had already been revealed. Sometimes life does not test us with comfort. It tests us with loss, misunderstanding, and silence. Mojisola's story reminds us that true character is not proven when people applaud us, but when they doubt us, when they reject us, when they misunderstand our intentions. It is easy to be kind when kindness is appreciated. But real strength is choosing to remain kind even when it costs everything. And Obina's journey teaches something just as important. You cannot force truth out of people without risking the very thing you are trying to find. Trust is not built through tests. It is built through honesty, vulnerability, and respect. In the end, what mattered was not who was right or wrong. What mattered was who chose to grow. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. What would you have done in Mojisola's place? Would you have stayed or walked away? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes a story can change more than just a moment. It can change a life.